My name is Romain Laugier. I work at WWF European Policy Office. And for the last 4 years, I've been looking at climate governance, whatever that means. So that includes, in a way, all sorts of targets relating to climate and energy, planning ahead, for example, looking at the role of science in decision-making, citizens' participation in decision-making, planning processes such as plans and strategies, and you see where I'm going at that with NECPs. So national energy and climate plans is also something we've been looking a lot at, and these days I'm working with CAN Europe, Climate Action Europe, Climate Action Network Europe, specifically on NECPs with a large group of partners as well. And so what we're trying to do is to be as impactful as we can as governments are preparing their NECPs. So I've been asked to simply set the scene and present what NECPs are about so that you can have fruitful discussions later today. So without further ado, I'm just going to walk you through the what, the when, and the how. And of course, I'm happy to respond to any questions as well afterwards. I only have 3 slides from now on, so it's going to be quite clear, I hope, simple. Essentially, NECPs, they are central strategic planning documents. They lay out all the policy framework for implementing the Fit for 55 package. So the Fit for 55 package is the sort of flurry of legislative proposals that came out in the last 2 years and that were negotiated on all sorts of climate pieces of legislation to implement the new climate objectives that we have at EU level. And the idea is to implement not only the 2030 climate target, but also climate neutrality. The EU has committed to achieve climate neutrality by 2050 across all member states. So NECPs, they are basically the one central planning tool that will decide how each sector is going to contribute to emissions reductions between 2021 and 2030. Each member state designs just one plan, that's why it's called a national plan, regulating all energy and climate rules and plans ahead. Any measures that member states want to implement, in theory, they will have to be first in the NECP. So these are very long documents, about hundreds of pages, presenting those plans based on projections, investment needs. They're going to explain, for example, how much renewable energy is needed in a national member states, how much energy savings is going to be, in which sectors, what efforts will be put in buildings, how a just transition is going to be organized. So it's getting very, very specific. The idea behind that is that we're not going to achieve climate neutrality by accident or by chance by 2050. It requires rigorous planning and consistency as well across policy areas. That is quite important if you try to look at decarbonization in a holistic aspects, the big manner. And you can find more about these rules in the governance regulation that was enacted in 2018. I've put on the slide the specific legislative provisions, but hopefully you should not need to be doing that. And one of the things you can read in the NECPs is all the sort of tools that the governments are going to resort to for mobilizing investments as well. They're supposed to describe for each measures how much it's going to cost and where the money could come from. Be it from state money or private money or EU fundings, these sorts of things. So that's the what in a nutshell. Now moving on to the when, there's a bit of a strict process for NECPs, and you can see a bit of a timeline on the screen. We'll get back to that. Maybe a particular feature of NECPs is that they are iterative, so it means they get updated every now and then, and you've already maybe heard about these national energy and climate plans that were decided on a few years back in 2020. So basically, we're doing exactly the same thing again. It was already envisaged in the legislation back in the days in 2018 that all the plans would not be perfect or final in one go. So they foresaw that there will be a first submission of the plan and then a revision of the plans. And we are today in the revision phase of the plan. So you can already find the government's plan online, and obviously they get to be revised this time. So how do they get to be revised? And that's maybe the second particular feature of the submission process, is that it's done jointly with the European Commission. So each member state, they propose a draft plan, or at the moment it's a draft revised plan, and they're going to submit it by the 30th of June of this year, so in less than 3 months. And the Commission is going to write down country-specific recommendations, looking at all the templates of the required elements that member states need to provide, and sort of scrutinize, check whether the member states has complied with that obligation, whether the plan is detailed enough, whether there's nothing missing in each of the very lengthy list of requirements in the plans. And what we've noticed in the previous iteration is that this has been somehow effective at shifting the plans and improving the plans. For example, on energy efficiency, a few years back, the plans were taken together very far away from the targets, and the final iteration meant that the plan was still a little bit missing out of the target, but a lot of that gap had been bridged. So there is some kind of influence that the Commission can use and can wait on the member states. Of course, it's not a silver bullet. And tomorrow, because it's very timely, as you can see, 15th of March, member states are going to submit progress reports on the NECPs, on how they've achieved the NECPs that they agreed on a few years back. So it's all very timely, and you might hear about that in the news, or you know, if you follow this process closely, you can yourself look up how your member states has complied with its plan in any area, so renewable energy, energy efficiency, buildings, and so on. And just to mention, because it's an iterative process, there is possibility to influence the plans and to get into it. And I think that's my next slide. It's the how, and that's where maybe it's a key hook for civil society, NGOs, cities, local authorities to really get involved. And there are two main provisions allowing that citizens and civil society are able to get their voice heard. There are public consultation first, and then multi-level dialogues. So consultations, I think we all know more or less what that means. Basically, member states need to ensure that it has consulted widely about the nature of the plan. So a good practice that is required is that they release online a first version of the revised plan, and then ask the views of civil societies on this draft. So the views need to be collected against a document. And then once they collect the views, they need to issue a summary of that views and send it to the Commission and include it in the plan. And of course, there are ways to do that. You need to ensure that civil society citizens are being informed, they have time to respond to that feedback, that there is a meaningful ability for them to get involved, you know, in a meaningful manner, so that civil servants can look at what is proposed and can still modify the final draft, and so on. So maybe those consultations have taken place in some shape or form in your government. That would be interesting to know. And the second thing is a multi-level climate and energy dialogue. So it's sort of permanent arena. I think you might have heard about this already, but it's a permanent dialogue. In theory, it's the governments who are supposed to organize that, and it's basically a forum to discuss in general the climate and energy scenarios they propose, the measures they need to achieve, and specifically the NECPs need to be discussed in that context. So yeah, there's basically essentially 3 months to go. Sorry, I'm just gonna stop sharing so that I can see you. There's 3 months to go before the plans are being revised. One thing I should say is that we are hearing that a lot of member states may be late submitting those plans, and that's particularly I would say one of the reasons for that is that the legislation making in Brussels is taking quite some time. We've had the revision of the Fit for 55 package I mentioned, looking across all policy areas, and a lot of these negotiations are still ongoing. For example, last Friday, we've had the final negotiations of energy efficiency, where EU countries accepted to be given a target that they have to implement by 2030. But those negotiations have not been finalized yet in the field of renewable energy, for instance. So if you ask government to make a plan to implement the EU targets, if on the other hand those targets are not being negotiating on, or the negotiations are not over, it's a bit difficult, right? So I think we are expecting those plans to take a bit more time, and that might justify the reason why for a lot of national governments we haven't seen public consultations yet, but maybe that's something you've been monitoring or you see. I know that some of you might be involved already in the setting of multi-level dialogue, and there again you might have noticed a bit of a delay maybe in the setting of the uptake of the plans.